The Kraxan Empire had spent millennia perfecting sterility. Their worlds were monuments to order, every surface polished to a mirror sheen, every organism catalogued and controlled, every ecosystem replaced with machinery. They called it progress. Humanity called it death. Deep in the African continent, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in Earth's last nature preserve, watching the sunset paint the savanna in gold. The preserve wasn't just a sanctuary. It was humanity's final act of defiance against the empire that had elevated them into galactic society 50 years ago. While other nations had surrendered their wilderness to Kraxan efficiency protocols, the United African Coalition had refused. They'd protected this last patch of true Earth, 1,000 square kilometers of untamed life. The preserve housed more than just Africa's indigenous species. When the Kraxan sterilization waves had swept across the planet, conservationists worldwide had rushed their most precious specimens here. The last tigers of Asia, the final pairs of South American jaguars, even pods of whales sustained in massive underground aquariums. It was Earth's genetic ark, protected by shields reverse-engineered from Kraxan technology. Sarah's hand rested on Raj's massive head, feeling the tiger's rumbling purr. He was the last of his kind, born in the preserve 15 years ago. The big cat's ancestors had roamed the forests of India for millions of years, and now he was the final link in that ancient chain. "We'll keep you safe," she whispered, more prayer than promise. The warning sirens shattered the evening peace. Sarah's comm unit crackled with the voice of Dr. Okoro, the preserve's head of security. "Chen, we have multiple Kraxan ships breaching the upper atmosphere. They're not responding to hails." She was already running toward the central facility, Raj loping beside her. The preserve's defensive systems were activating, energy shields shimming into visibility above. But something was wrong. The shields weren't reaching full power. "They're using a new frequency." Dr. Okoro's voice was tight with fear. "The shields aren't. They're getting through." The first Kraxan ship appeared overhead, its hull gleaming with that familiar, terrible sterility. It was a cleansing vessel, designed to purify ecosystems. Sarah had seen their work before. Landscapes reduced to bare mineral, every trace of organic life eliminated. "Get everything into the underground bunkers." Sarah screamed into her comm. "All specimens, all seed banks, everything." But even as she gave the order, more ships appeared. Dozens, hundreds. This wasn't a standard cleansing mission. This was annihilation. The first sterilization beam struck near the wetlands. Where it touched, life simply stopped. Plants crumbled to ash. Animals fell mid-stride. The very soil turned gray and lifeless. Sarah watched in horror as a herd of elephants tried to flee, only to be caught in another beam. In seconds, generations of conservation work were undone. Raj roared beside her, his ancient instincts recognizing the approaching death. Sarah grabbed his collar, trying to drag him toward the nearest bunker entrance. But the tiger pulled away, charging toward the nearest Kraxan ship with prehistoric fury. The beam caught him mid-leap. Sarah screamed as Raj, the last tiger Earth would ever know, dissolved into gray dust. The destruction was methodical, thorough, and quick. Within hours, the preserve was gone. Every plant, every animal, every microbe, transformed into sterile matter that met Kraxan standards of purity. Sarah stood in the ruins with her fellow scientists, watching their life's work settle as ash around them. A holographic message flickered to life above the devastation. The Kraxan regional overseer, a being of chrome and ceramic, spoke with characteristic precision. "The illegal maintenance of uncontrolled biological entities has been addressed. Your species' continued resistance to proper environmental standards was inefficient. Order has been restored." The message ended. The ships departed. And in the sterile silence they left behind, something in humanity's collective heart hardened into purpose. That night, as the survivors huddled in the empty bunkers meant to protect Earth's vanished heritage, Dr. Sarah Chen made a call to her sister, Captain Li Chen of the Earth Defense Force. Lee, she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face, remember how you said the military was looking for new ways to fight the Kraxen? Yes, I have 2,000 scientists who just watched their life's work die. We've spent decades studying Earth's most resilient species, the ones that survived every mass extinction our planet threw at them. And now, Sarah looked at her hands, still gray with the ashes of countless unique species of Raj. Now we're going to teach the Kraxen why sterility is a weakness. Life finds a way, sister. And we're going to help it find a way right through their perfect, pristine empire. In the coming days, as news of the preserve's destruction spread across Earth and its colonies, humans everywhere felt something primal awaken. The Kraxen hadn't just destroyed animals, they'd attacked something fundamental to human identity. The wild, untamed beauty that had shaped our species. The Empire had believed they were eliminating a minor irritant, a single preserve that offended their sensibilities. Instead, they had planted the seeds of their own destruction. Humanity had spent its entire existence learning from the most resilient life forms Earth had produced. Now, those lessons would become weapons. The war that followed would teach the galaxy that nature, like humanity, should never be underestimated. 3 months after the preserve's destruction, the lowest levels of Earth's lunar base had been transformed. Where sterile laboratories once stood, now a controlled chaos of life flourished. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through corridors lined with experimental growth chambers, each containing something that would have horrified the Kraxen Empire. The loss of Earth's last preserve had sparked an unprecedented collaboration between military strategists and conservation scientists. Captain Li Chen had provided the facilities and resources. Sarah and her fellow survivors had brought something far more valuable: decades of research into Earth's most indomitable species. The Australian section is ready for review, Dr. Hesson called out as Sarah passed his lab. Through the transparent walls, she could see the results of his work. Plants derived from species that had survived the world's harshest desert conditions, now engineered to thrive in environments that would kill natural flora. They were beautiful, in a terrible way. But it was Dr. Yuki's project that held the most promise. The Japanese scientist had spent her career studying extremophiles, organisms that flourished in conditions that should have been lethal. Now she was creating something new. We're calling them pioneers, Yuki explained, leading Sarah to a sealed chamber. Inside, microscopic organisms swarmed in nutrient tanks, based on tardigrades but heavily modified. They can survive in space, resist radiation, and most importantly, she pressed a button, introducing a sample of Kraxen building material into the tank. The organisms immediately began to break it down. They eat their sterile materials and convert them into organic compounds. The research teams had learned from their enemies. Where the Kraxen sought to eliminate all uncontrolled life, humanity would weaponize life's fundamental drive to expand and adapt. Every project in the facility represented a different approach to this philosophy. Sarah's own team focused on larger organisms. They had salvaged DNA samples from the preserve's archives, using them to engineer creatures that combined Earth's most successful survival traits. The results were both magnificent and terrifying. Animals that could reproduce rapidly, adapt to almost any environment, and resist the Kraxen's sterilization technology. But their greatest asset came from an unexpected source. The sylph, a species that had been fighting the Kraxen for centuries, made contact after hearing about the preserve's destruction. Their ambassador, a being of living crystal named Ix, arrived at the lunar base with an offer. "Your approach is unique," Ix observed, its crystalline form refracting light, as it studied the research labs. "Most species try to match the Kraxen's technology. None have thought to use primitive biological warfare. Life isn't primitive," Sarah corrected. "It's the most sophisticated system in the universe. We just needed the right motivation to weaponize it." The sylph provided crucial intelligence about Kraxen worlds, particularly their environmental control systems. Every Kraxan planet was maintained by vast networks of purification machines, keeping their environment sterile. These machines, Ix revealed, were vulnerable to biological interference. As their preparations continued, Earth's diplomatic corps played their part. They apologized to the Kraxan for the preserve's existence, pretending to finally accept their standards. The Empire's leadership, confident in their superiority, never questioned why so many scientific resources were being redirected to agricultural research. The first test came 6 months after the preserve's fall. A small team, led by Dr. Hassan, infiltrated a minor Kraxan mining outpost. They released a handful of modified organisms, plants engineered to thrive on sterile worlds, animals designed to spread them, and swarms of microscopic pioneers. Within weeks, the outpost's pristine surfaces were cracking as vegetation forced its way through. The Kraxan sterilization beams proved useless against creatures specifically engineered to resist them. When they tried to destroy the infection with conventional weapons, the remains simply fed the next wave of growth. Life adapts, Sarah explained to her sister as they watched the footage. That's what the Kraxan never understood. The more you try to control it, the more ways it finds to survive. We've just accelerated the process. The success emboldened other subjugated species. The Sylph weren't the only ones who had suffered under Kraxan rule. As word spread of a weapon that could crack their perfect worlds, allies emerged from hidden corners of the galaxy. Each brought their own knowledge, their own resources, their own grievances against the Empire. Captain Li Chen coordinated with these new allies, planning simultaneous strikes across Kraxan space. Sarah and her teams worked tirelessly, refining their creations, making them hardier, more aggressive, more difficult to control. The Kraxan had thought themselves the masters of environmental manipulation. Humanity would show them what that really meant. 1 year after the preserve's destruction, Sarah stood in a launch bay, watching autonomous pods being loaded with their biological cargo. Each contained a carefully curated mix of engineered life forms, ready to transform sterile worlds into savage gardens. The pods' hulls were made from living metal, developed by the Sylph to evade Kraxan detection. Are we certain about this? Lai asked, standing beside her sister. Once we release these, there's no controlling them. The worlds we target will never be the same. Sarah thought of Raj, of all the species lost when the preserve fell. Good, she said. The galaxy needs some wildness in it. The Kraxan wanted to eliminate chaos. Let's show them what chaos really looks like. The first wave of pods launched that night, carrying the seeds of vengeance toward carefully chosen targets. As they accelerated into the darkness, Sarah remembered something she'd once read about Earth's history. Life, whether guided by nature or science, had a way of breaking free. The Kraxan were about to learn this lesson the hard way. Operation Green Tide began on a perfectly ordinary day in the Kraxan calendar. Their central worlds, monuments to order and control, stood pristine under artificial suns. No one noticed the microscopic rain of biological pods entering the atmospheres of 100 different planets simultaneously. Admiral Terrace, the Kraxan's head of environmental control, was reviewing efficiency reports when the first alarm sounded. On a minor administrative world, environmental sensors detected unauthorized organic growth. Initial response teams deployed standard sterilization protocols, expecting routine results. They failed. The modified organisms didn't just resist the sterilization beams, they thrived on them. The energy meant to destroy them was absorbed and converted into explosive growth. Within hours, the administrative world's perfect chrome surfaces were cracking under the assault of engineered vegetation. Impossible, Terrace muttered, watching as reports flooded in from across Kraxan space. The pattern was the same everywhere. Pristine environments were transforming into untamed wilderness at an unprecedented rate. Buildings that had stood untouched for centuries were being devoured by hybrid organisms that combined the most aggressive traits of Earth's species. In the Kraxan capital's central plaza, crystalline towers began to blur with green. Plants engineered from kudzu and strangler figs wrapped around structures, their roots enhanced with the ability to dissolve metal and plastic. In the underground levels, pioneer swarms converted sterile materials into rich, living soil. The Kraxen's response was predictable, and exactly what humanity had planned for. When they deployed their planet-wide sterilization fields, the fields themselves became vectors for the engineered life forms. Dr. Yuki's pioneers had been designed to travel through energy networks, using the Empire's own infrastructure to spread. Sarah Chen, now aboard the Earth Defense Force flagship, watched the transformation through long-range sensors. "The second phase can begin," she announced to the assembled fleet commanders. The Sylph ships, nearly invisible in their crystalline camouflage, moved into position around key Kraxen worlds. The Empire had always valued order above all else. Their cities were laid out in perfect grids, their populations controlled down to the individual, their entire society built on the principle of absolute predictability. Now that devotion to order became their weakness. They had no protocols for dealing with the chaos of evolved life. When swarms of engineered insects bypassed their shields, they had no defense. When modified bacteria began converting their food production facilities into thriving ecosystems, they had no countermeasures. Each attempt to restore order only spread the contagion further. "Your weapons are..." The Sylph Ambassador Ix paused, searching for the right word. "Elegant. They do not destroy. They transform." Sarah nodded, watching as another Kraxen world bloomed with unauthorized life. "We learned from Earth's history. Life always finds a way to survive, to adapt, to spread. We just needed to remind the galaxy of that truth." The Kraxen leadership, faced with an enemy they couldn't sterilize, began to fracture. Some worlds broke away entirely, their populations secretly relieved to see color and life return to their sterile environments. Others launched desperate counterattacks, only to find their weapons turned against them by organisms that treated radiation and energy weapons as nutrition. Humanity's allies seized the opportunity. The Sylph launched precision strikes against key Kraxen infrastructure, their living ships blending perfectly with the new organic chaos spreading across the Empire. Other species, inspired by Earth's example, began their own rebellions. But it was the psychological impact that proved most devastating. The Kraxen had built their society on the belief that they could control everything, eliminate all uncertainty. Now, watching their perfect worlds transform into untamed wilderness, that belief crumbled. Admiral Terrace, in what would become a famous transmission, captured the Empire's growing despair. How do you fight an enemy that grows stronger with each attempt to destroy it? How do you impose order on something that thrives in chaos? In the heart of former Kraxen space, Sarah walked through what had once been a sterile processing center. Now it was a jungle, teeming with engineered life. The buildings had been consumed by vegetation, transformed into living architecture that merged technology with biology. A group of young Kraxen, children who had never seen uncontrolled life, watched in fascination as butterflies, engineered from Earth species to survive in any atmosphere, danced through the air. Their parents might have recoiled in horror, but these children reached out to touch the delicate wings with wonder. "That's how we win," Sarah told her sister over a secure channel. "Not by destroying their worlds, but by showing them what they've been missing. Life isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be nurtured, guided, allowed to find its own way." The Green Offensive, as historians would later call it, marked a turning point in galactic history. The Kraxen Empire, which had sought to impose sterility on the universe, was being transformed by the very chaos they had tried to eliminate. And humanity, once dismissed as primitive for their attachment to nature, had proven that life itself was the most powerful force in existence. The Kraxen High Command met in their last untouched stronghold, a space station sanitized hourly by the most powerful sterilization fields they could generate. Yet even here, tiny green shoots were beginning to emerge from the seams in the walls. Their perfect order was crumbling, one spore at a time. Supreme Commander Vex, his chrome exterior dulled with concern, faced the harsh reality displayed on their monitoring screens. 80% of Kraxan space had been compromised by what they now called the living plague. Their perfectly ordered society was dissolving into a riot of untamed life. Our latest analysis confirms our worst fears, reported Science Director Mel, her metallic voice trembling. The human-engineered organisms aren't just surviving, they're evolving. Each generation adapts more quickly to our countermeasures. They're learning. The implications were staggering. For millennia, the Kraxan had achieved dominance through absolute control. Their technology could sterilize worlds, their engineering could create perfect environments, their will could shape reality itself. Or so they had believed. Now, watching their empire crumble before primitive biological weapons, they faced an unprecedented truth. They had never really been in control at all. On the former Kraxan capital world of Primarix, now renamed New Eden by its revolutionaries, Sarah Chen studied the latest data with a mixture of awe and concern. The engineered organisms had exceeded all predictions. They weren't just surviving, they were creating entirely new ecosystems, blending Earth's biological principles with alien environments in ways her team had never imagined possible. "We may have been too successful," Dr. Yuki admitted, showing Sarah the latest readings. The pioneers had evolved beyond their original programming, developing new abilities to transform inorganic matter into living tissue. On some worlds, entire cities were being transformed into living entities, buildings becoming something between plant and animal, technology merging with biology in unprecedented ways. The Kraxans' desperate attempts to maintain control had only accelerated the process. Their sterilization technologies, once the terror of the galaxy, now served as catalysts for even faster evolution. Each blast of purifying energy was absorbed and repurposed, feeding the growing tide of life that threatened to overwhelm them. Captain Li Chen's fleet intercepted a Kraxan evacuation convoy fleeing from one of their core worlds. But instead of resistance, they received a surprising transmission. "We request guidance," the Kraxan commander transmitted, his artificial voice hesitant. "Our youngest citizens are becoming infected with unauthorized emotional responses to the biological contamination. They express appreciation for the chaos." It was true. On world after world, the younger generations of Kraxan were responding to the invasion of life in unexpected ways. Children raised in sterile environments were discovering the joy of gardens, the wonder of animals, the beautiful unpredictability of natural systems. Some had even begun modifying their own cybernetic bodies to incorporate biological elements. The Sylph ambassador Ix observed this phenomenon with crystalline amusement. "Your weapons strike at something deeper than their technology," it told Sarah. "You have infected them with a longing they didn't know they possessed, a hunger for life itself." But victory brought its own challenges. Some of the engineered organisms had become too successful, threatening to overwhelm even their creators' ability to manage them. On several worlds, the new ecosystems had grown so complex and interconnected that any attempt to modify them risked catastrophic collapse. Sarah stood in what had once been the Kraxans' central planning hall, now a vast arboretum where engineered plants grew through and around the remains of their control systems. The scene was both beautiful and terrifying, a perfect representation of life's ability to transform, adapt, and overcome. "We have to make a choice," she told the assembled Earth Defense Council. "We can try to contain what we've created, impose our own kind of order on these new ecosystems, or we can do what nature has always done, let them find their own balance." The decision was made more urgent by the arrival of a formal communication from the remaining Kraxan leadership. Supreme Commander Vex himself requested a meeting, not to negotiate surrender, but to seek understanding. "We believed order was the highest form of existence," Vex admitted, his mechanical body incongruous among the living growth that now filled the meeting chamber. "We sought to perfect the galaxy by eliminating chaos. But watching these new ecosystems emerge, seeing how they adapt and stabilize themselves without external control, perhaps we were wrong about the nature of perfection." The price of pride was becoming clear. The Kraxan had spent millennia trying to impose their version of perfection on the galaxy. Now they were being forced to confront a different kind of perfection: the intricate, self-organizing complexity of living systems. As the fourth phase of humanity's vengeance drew to a close, it became apparent that the real transformation wasn't happening to the planets, but to the Kraxan themselves. They were learning, painfully but inevitably, that true power lay not in controlling life, but in understanding and working with it. The galaxy would never be the same. But perhaps, Sarah reflected as she watched a group of Kraxan children tentatively petting an engineered creature that combined the best traits of Earth's most companionable species. That was exactly what it needed. 1 year after Operation Green Tide began, the galaxy gathered to witness an unprecedented event. The Kraxan Supreme Council, what remained of it, had called for a galactic conclave. The chosen location was symbolic: the transformed ruins of their former capital, where crystalline spires now intertwined with living architecture. Supreme Commander Vex stood before representatives from 100 species, his once pristine crone form now incorporating organic elements, a physical testament to the Kraxan's transformation. Behind him, the former imperial palace had become a vast ecological archive, its walls alive with vegetation that stored data in its very DNA. "We were wrong," Vex began, his mechanical voice carrying new harmonics that mimicked organic tones. "For millennia, we sought to perfect the galaxy by eliminating what we saw as chaos. We called it elevation, progress, order. We were blind to the perfect order that already existed in living systems." Dr. Sarah Chen, seated with Earth's delegation, felt a complex mix of emotions. Their victory had exceeded all expectations, but it had also revealed challenges they hadn't anticipated. The engineered ecosystems they'd created had taken on lives of their own, evolving in ways that defied prediction or control. Therefore, Vex continued, the Kraxan Empire formally proposes the establishment of the Galactic Life Council. Its mission will be to preserve and study the new biological systems that have emerged, and to ensure that no species ever again attempts to impose sterility on the galaxy. The proposal was revolutionary. The Kraxan, once the greatest threat to life in the galaxy, would become its guardians. Their technological expertise, combined with their hard-won respect for biological systems, made them uniquely qualified for the role. The Sylph Ambassador Ix crystallized in agreement, its form reflecting the new hybrid life forms that now populated former Kraxan worlds. From the ashes of order, a new balance emerges. It is fitting. The transformation of the Kraxan worlds had become a subject of intense scientific interest. The engineered organisms had created entirely new forms of life, blending biological and technological elements in ways that challenged existing definitions of both. Some worlds had developed vast neural networks of living matter, achieving a kind of planetary consciousness that even humanity hadn't predicted. Sarah's team had documented over 10,000 new species that had evolved from their original engineered organisms. The pioneers had become the foundation for entirely new branches of the tree of life, while the engineered plants and animals had adapted to fill ecological niches that had never existed before. But perhaps the most profound change was in the Kraxan themselves. The younger generation, raised amid this biological revolution, saw the world differently than their parents. They had developed a deep appreciation for the complexity and beauty of living systems. Many had chosen to modify themselves, incorporating organic elements into their cybernetic forms. "We thought we were teaching them a lesson about vengeance," Sarah told her sister as they watched a group of young Kraxan tending to a garden of hybrid Earth alien species. "Instead, we taught them about life itself." The Galactic Conclave concluded with the ratification of the Living Worlds Accord. All species pledged to protect and preserve biological diversity, recognizing it as the foundation of galactic stability. The former Kraxan territories would become a vast laboratory for studying the interaction between natural and engineered life forms. In a final symbolic gesture, Supreme Commander Vex announced the transformation of the former Imperial Palace into the galaxy's first xenological archive. Its living walls would preserve the genetic heritage of every known species, protected by the very technology that had once threatened to destroy it. Sarah stood in the archive's central chamber, where a memorial had been erected. It displayed holographic images of Earth's lost preserve and all the species that had perished there. But around these images, real life flourished, descendants of the engineered organisms that had avenged them. A young Kraxan approached her, its form a harmonious blend of mechanical and organic components. "Is it true?" it asked. "Did all this begin because we destroyed your animals?" Sarah thought of Raj, the last tiger, and all that his loss had set in motion. "It began because you thought you could improve on nature by eliminating it," she replied. "But look around you now. Life found a way, as it always does, and in trying to avenge what we lost, we created something entirely new. The galaxy had been transformed, not through destruction, but through the irresistible force of life itself. Humanity's vengeance had evolved into something far more powerful, a revolution in the way intelligent beings understood their relationship with the living universe.